welcome to Talk 90s to Me, where, as we well know, our love has got no money, he's got his strong beliefs. And one of those strong beliefs is that Anna Scoos is our new queen. Queen Anna, one of our amazing Patreon members who's spending a tiny amount of money every month on supporting her favourite 90s pod, and now she is a full-on queen. Thank you, Queen Anna. And thank you also to Tim Forshaw, who also supports us on Patreon and is duly crowned this week's king. Hello, King Tim. Enjoy your kingly life. If you too would like to become Talk 90s royalty, then why not pop over to patreon.com and search up Talk 90s to Me. For just a few pounds a month, you'll also get extras like episodes about Furbies and fun times, oh yes, and the chance to get your hands on some Talk 90s to Me merch, including fetching Talk 90s bucket hats for the upcoming summer. And if you can't afford to do that, we don't mind. Just email us. Tell us your 90s thoughts. Just email Talk90s to me at podmasters, that's podmasters.co.uk. Now on with the show. This is Talk 90s to Me, where we start putting parties on as a 16-year-old and start DJing age 17, where we manage to get a law degree whilst putting on illegal raves, where we stay with Kiss FM for 10 years before moving to Radio 1, where we play Pasha before the 90s even happen, where we're voted DJ Mag's Best DJ in the World in 1995 and morph seamlessly into not only being a superstar DJ, but also, a little later, an actual lawyer, just to prove that our nickname is correct. I'm Miranda Sawyer, and this week on Talk 90s, I am delighted to be talking to the brilliant DJ and entertainment lawyer, Jules O'Riordan, better known to the world as Judge Jules. Hello, Jules.
Thank you for inviting me, Miranda.
OK, look, this is a 90s show, as you know, but as with many things 90s, things kind of start a little bit earlier and maybe stretch on. They start in the 1980s with you, if we're talking about music. You grew up in North London, you had an uncle that was actually a DJ, and you had a brother that was into music. You were into electro music as a teenager in the late 80s, but you started putting gigs on when you were like really young. Is that right?
I did. I found a venue where it was actually an era where you didn't need to show even a fake ID when you were under 18. You just had to rock on up and have a few quid in your pocket to spend behind the bar. It's a venue that still exists in North London. And
what's it called?
I don't want to name. Well, I suppose I can name them so far after the time. It's the Boston Arms in Tufnell Park, North London.
Okay.
It's a big live music venue now, and I'm sure it's under different management anyway. And I think the thing that you don't realise at the time, although we used it to our advantage, is that when you are 16, you've probably got the biggest social circle you'll have in your entire life. Yeah. But you've also got the least amount of things to do. And we were not by the standards of big wig entertainment entrepreneurs. We weren't exactly right out there, but in our own sort of small North London way, that's what we were trying to do from very young, which was expose other people to our nerdy obsession for music. And there was just nothing else to do. So if we got in there first and we started putting on a lot of events.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think you're right. Like when you're like, especially from like age 13 till when you can get into proper venues, which, you know, maybe you do need fake ID or whatever, but that age between 13 to kind of 17, there's nothing to do, is there? And you're really wanting to go out. You don't want to be at home. You know, that's why everyone ends up in parks, because they can't go anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, we were a good alternative to our local park, that's for sure. It was that or Primrose Hill. Yeah,
and so you set it up. Did you have a name for this party?
Well, I did. In the end, as I sort of evolved as a promoter and into the let's not call them illegal, let's call them the unlicensed events, we did have a name. That was when I was about 18. We were called Family Function. I used to work with Norman J, who operated under the name Shake and Finger Pop. But when I very first started, we were just sort of going down to the local print shop, getting a bit of coloured cardboard, putting that through the photocopiers and creating flyers. Of course, that was the way one handed out your publicity. And since everybody sort of knew everybody at these events by at least no more than 2 degrees of separation, there was so much of a crowd that it was very easy to do. I mean, clearly we didn't charge a lot of money to get in.
No, of course not.
Because nobody had any money.
Would have gone. But like, so was it mostly 16-year-olds, or was it like a big age range?
No, it's pretty much all people within a sort of, I don't know, a 13 to 17-year-old spectrum.
That's so good. I really like it. And what music were you playing?
I was kind of... Old disco was quite a lot of it. I sort of grew up actually not liking disco very much. And then I think with anything that's quite danceable, you hit an epiphany where you hear it in a dance floor and on a dance floor in its proper environment through, well, what was considered then to be a good sound system would be laughed at probably now.
Yeah.
And then you do have that sort of epiphany. And I sort of spent my weekends going around Record and Tape Exchange in Camden, my local one, and down to Shepherd's Bush, and trying to find sort of old tunes and kind of fill in the gaps and almost go back on oneself. I mean, I came as a very young teenager, came out of that disco sucks era and absolutely detested lots of records that I went on to love and play as a DJ. Hated Chic, hated everything that Nile Rodgers stood for, who I now think is one of the most talented guys that has ever walked this earth. And that's what we were playing back in the day.
And what was the big banger? Like, what was the track that was guaranteed to get all the 15-year-olds jumping?
I couldn't really say for sure. I mean, it would have been things like, I don't know, Pick Up the Pieces, Average White Bands. It was the slightly more left of centre disco stuff. I mean, I must say that we quite rapidly moved out of that. That was really just in the gigs that I did when I was 16. We very quickly moved sort of into like old school hip hop, and then house began to come along. But it was quite useful it was sort of filling in gaps of musical knowledge. But if you were a nerd, which I think all DJs ultimately are, a bit anarchy, there's nothing wrong with being, it's quite a healthy obsession, and there's much worse things to do if you want to be nerdy about, or much more embarrassing things to do if you want to be nerdy about things.
Yeah, I think record shops are still still full of nerds. There's nothing wrong with that. So you were putting on these parties. You were still really young, and then you left school and went to university, but you were actually still in London because you went to the LSE, right?
I did, yeah. I studied law at LSE, and I was putting on, and by that point I was putting on events at bigger scale because I'd met up with other promoters who, we sort of had North London. By the time we put on a number of things, the crowd size increased because we were still all of an age where you have that huge social circle. And we teamed up, as I alluded to, with Norman J for quite a number of... And I did briefly with Soul to Soul as well in North London, who had slightly different crowds, especially when we teamed up with Norman J, who's from West London, had a big sort of Notting Hill, Acton kind of West London crowd. And then suddenly you've got half of London, if you like, at your disposal coming to these events. They were all in warehouses. We found sort of disused properties. It's almost unbelievable to think of a concept that anywhere inside the M25 would have some disused property, but at the time there was a lot of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was interesting to me because I moved down to London in '88, and so I'm from near Manchester, so we would go to places like the Hacienda, but also if there was parties, there's actually weirdly in northern cities, there were a lot of disused warehouses, of course, because they were in industrial cities that then went into decline. So there was loads of places. And when I came to London, I expected it to be what I'd read about, which was like...
paved with gold.
Yeah, paved with gold, but also like the raves would be like somewhere out of the M25. And actually there were like in film studios and funny, like they were kind of more empty big buildings than I had expected.
Yeah, especially in Shoreditch, actually. It's so odd. Shoreditch is such a sort of a social centre full of bars, full of restaurants, some hotels, etc. But it was dead then.
Yeah, completely
Not only
dead.
was it dead, it was a sort of nondescript bolt-on to the City of London where everything was closed at the weekend. And those businesses that were open were not very interesting businesses.
Yeah.
It's almost like when you talk about King's Cross then and now, people almost refuse to believe you if they're a generation apart.
Yeah, there was a pub that was, and I remember just near Old Street on the way between King's Cross and there, and I remember it shut down at 7:00 at night because it was for city people, and they just all had gone. So it's such a different time, wasn't it?
It was, and there were, but not only was it dead without any activity, there were a lot of disused warehouses in that area, and it wasn't just us doing things in the area. There were a few other promoters, but that was, ultimately, and there's quite a parallel really with trying to make your way as a musician in 2026. if you don't do it yourself, if you don't get up and do it yourself, nobody's going to help you along the way. And there's no way that, notwithstanding the fact we had quite a significant following, but if we were to have even bothered knock on the door of the nightclubs at the time...
Oh my God, they were awful anyway.
Well,
the London
were awful,
nightclubs
but we would have been
terrible.
told to sling our hooks, so we had to go and find the opportunities for ourselves.
Yeah, that's really true. But I do remember coming to some London nightclubs, having come down from Manchester, thinking, these are terrible, they're tiny and they're really stuck
glitzy
up.
and horrible, yeah.
Yeah, they were terrible.
Yeah.
And so you were doing these parties, and obviously, I think it's quite a well-known fact that one of the reasons why you got your name Judge Jules was because you were sent out to talk to the police and calm everything down, because you were good at talking to the police. Maybe because you were also learning a law.
I think it was mainly because I was a law student, because I found some loopholes that when the Criminal Justice Act happened, which I think was 1994, the law against illegal events got very, very severe. But up to that point, we were sort of operating on a kind of loophole type basis, based around squatters' laws and a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't have the internet then. So I went to my law library at LSE, I read up some stuff, posted some squatters' notices, and I would always speak to the police when they came along, which as an 18-19-year-old, in retrospect, was pretty dumb, but that's what I did. And like all good nicknames, I didn't call myself Judge. And in fact, especially now as a practicing music lawyer, I would never purport or pretend to be a judge, far from it. But like all good nicknames, that was given to me by the people that I was working with.
And what were the loopholes that you would say to them then?
We are squatters. We are squatting this property, and we intend to live here. Squatting was a big deal in London at the time. I mean, you could barely squat in London now because there's almost nowhere to do it. But it was, it was a thing.
So you were saying, actually, we're taking over this, and we are going to live here. We're just having a party at the moment.
Yeah, and that was a genuine loophole at the time.
That's so good. I love it. And you finished your law degree.
I did, yeah.
Did you enjoy it? I'm only asking because I did a law degree at the same time. I did not enjoy it.
I come from a family of teachers, so
Me too. I think we've got. This is why you think, I'm going to earn some more money. But, it's going to be better, and actually, it's really boring.
No, I mean, I'm one of these people who was lucky enough to be quite academic and was reasonably good at most subjects, but didn't actually. My parents, because a lot of them were teachers, they were always like, you've got to love this subject. You've really got to live it. You've got to experience it. And I didn't actually truly love any subject that I did at school, and therefore doing a law degree was a bit of a safe option under those circumstances. If you're a bit gobby and you're capable of talking yourself through the university interview, then that was enough. So no, didn't particularly enjoy it at the time because it bore no connection with reality, really, law. That was the problem. Now, when you're young, you can't really see the tangible, unless you're a criminal Oliver Twist style, you can't see a tangible connection between law and life. Whereas obviously the older you get, the more tangible it becomes. Yeah,
that's interesting. It is quite a dry degree as well. That's what I would say. But you were running what we can say is like the parties really that you were running as well. Were you doing stuff at the university or just outside?
No, not in university, no.
Yeah, you didn't need to, I suppose, because you were already established.
Where I went to university, LSE's, even then, obviously subsequently, a lot of universities in the UK, particularly more prestigious ones, have quite a high percentage of overseas students because that's how the universities make their money.
Yeah.
But LSE has always been, even before that was a thing, has always had a very high percentage of overseas students because it's quite prestigious internationally. And they, with the best will in the world, most international students from most territories are not really going to get into British underground club culture.
Well, that would change. But then maybe not. I think it's interesting because when you're talking about it, I think what we forget, because now I think going to parties, particularly house music, is absolutely universal. But at the time, it really wasn't. It wasn't like for the cognoscenti, but it just wasn't universal. You had to find out where the parties were. You had to turn up. They sometimes were quite hard to get into because you didn't know where you were going. It was just not as easy or as universal as it is now. No,
and one of the reasons why it was people wanted to find them was because the licensing laws in the UK were so ridiculous at the time. Outside of London, almost everything shut at 2. In Northern Ireland at 1. Occasionally in London at 3, but there was absolutely nothing whatsoever legal open after that point. The first 2 I recall being open any later was the Ministry, because the Ministry found the most incredible licensing barrister. Ironically, we moved slightly into the 90s, even though you don't necessarily want to do that at this juncture. But when the ministry opened in 1990, they found the most incredible licensing barrister who, I don't know, think I found some loopholes. He must have he just did. He found loopholes that changed British nightclub culture forever. And Terminals in Farringdon as well managed to do it. But they were the only two, really. So there was a huge latent demand. You know, I think we were the first generation that owed no sort of particular allegiance to wartime values. You know, our parents, the thought of, you know, these days I DJ a lot. And it's mainly to over 35 stroke 40s. But the thought of our parents' generation going out and having a good time and doing anything beyond having the odd dinner party, it's just wholly alien. So, you know, we were the first generation who went out and enjoyed ourselves and didn't really think there was anything stiff upper lipped or un-British about just staying out all night.
Yeah. I do think it's the staying out all night is the really important thing because of the, as you say, the licensing laws, because everything would shut at 2, even like Bar Italia would shut at 2. So you were looking for something to do, and there was only kind of illegal drinking dens or going raving, really. So you've got this established. Essentially, this is your burgeoning nascent career, isn't it? So, you know, you could have been a lawyer. You decide, no, this is not for me. I've done my degree, but I'm not into it. And so you become a DJ, which if you'd said that to anybody else, like if you'd said that to somebody in 1982, they would have kind of laughed at you. It wasn't really a thing to be, was it? It wasn't like a career option.
No, absolutely not. And I was sort of lucky in that my dad was an actor. Well, for quite a lot of his professional life was an actor, a jobbing actor, where, you know, had certain big gigs at certain periods of time and then was unemployed at other periods of time. So at least he got the concept of being a freelance sort of entertainer, even though being a DJ was wholly alien to him. I mean, I remember him going to one of my gigs and it was in Farringdon somewhere, and he turned up and literally the only people in the club were the people sort of polishing the bottles and putting the glasses on the shelves, left before anybody came in, and then dined out on the fact he'd been to one of my gigs for the next decade.
That's so sweet. They just don't know, like nobody's turning up till 2. I'm really sorry. So obviously one of the things that house music was fueled by that time was like basically ecstasy. And I remember going to a rave it was some kind of film studios in Battersea or something. And I didn't know what ecstasy was. And I remember turning up thinking, oh, this is great. Everyone's so friendly. They're really nice. You know, they're really energetic. And they kept saying to me, are you on one? And I didn't know what it was. So I was like, I might be. I'm not sure. I'm drinking lager. This is to be a really fun time. And I kind of lasted till 9 because I was young, and then didn't really understand what was going on. But the main thing I thought about it was everyone was really friendly, and it was a huge mix of people that you wouldn't normally see, because it was literally like people you would. I know this is a cliche, but it really was true. It was people that you would probably meet on the football terraces, and then quite posh people, and everybody in between. And I had never seen that before at a club.
That's totally true. I mean, there was a perfect storm really of late night events, a new music genre, because house didn't really exist before about 1986, and ecstasy, which probably started appearing all over the country in pockets in about 1988, and those three factors, and of course the latter was a big factor in all of it.
Yeah. And were you conscious of that when you were DJing? I'm not asking if you're taking E, but like, can you feel it on the dance floor?
Yeah, well, yeah, there was a sudden, but also the sort of BPM of what I was playing. I came out of playing sort of rare groove and playing hip hop with the odd house record quite uncomfortably thrown in, because obviously the BPMs are very dissimilar, into only playing house. So inevitably it's going to be a lot more energy inherent in that anyway. But I mean, it was a very rapid transformation. And obviously when the so-called orbital raves kicked in 88 and 89, I was lucky enough to do quite a lot of the bigger ones. One went from doing playing to 1,500 people, which of itself was still quite a lot of people to play to at that age in the culture that existed at the time, to playing to like 20,000 people in the space of probably 3 or 4 months. And then there were those 2 summers of 88 and 89, where it really broke enormously. So to compare the gigs before and after those 2 points was just
it's mad, isn't it?
Very dramatic.
It's so dramatic. So when we go into the 90s, is basically you're established as a DJ. Kind of house music is established. Maybe not as it is as much as it is now, but it's established as a thing that people can go to. It's a genuine kind of catalyst for the rest of the decade, isn't it?
It is, and I think the other big thing is how big it became in every key city of the UK. I had been on, we haven't really mentioned radio, but I've been, briefly you did. I'd been on Pirate Radio Kiss, been on Kiss then as it became a legal station, not an illegal station, and that's spread the word significantly around the country, particularly since Kiss went out in Manchester for a bit, or the whole Northwest for quite a period of time. So suddenly one was, getting booked in a much broader part of the country, almost in concentric circles every year. I could see my bookings going sort of more and more far and wide across the British Isles, but you could just see the music taking off everywhere. Yeah. Because before that, there had been certain key centres of, Glasgow's always had a strong scene. Manchester, it goes without saying. London, it goes without saying. A few other places. But suddenly it was just every major town and certainly every city had these significant dance nights.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to be part of, to watch it. Did you find that people like different kind of music in different cities?
I think if you went the further up north you went, or if you went to Scotland, you went to Northern Ireland, definitely people like it faster and a bit harder.
Yeah.
Faster for sure, a bit harder in certain enclaves. The fundamental kind of 4/4 beats, house music, straight into kind of more banging house music, into sort of techno, it was the same, yeah. But, Londoners, regrettably, dare I say it, and I'm a Londoner, so I'm qualified to say it, it can be a bit too cool for school sometimes.
Yeah. Whereas us Northerners were going for it, that's what we're saying. Okay, shall we talk Kiss a little bit? So Kiss FM was a pirate radio station that started in South London, and then it kind of applied for a legal licence, got knocked back for a year, and then got it at the beginning of the 90s. And you were on Kiss when it was a pirate, and you were on Kiss when it was legal as well.
Correct, both, yeah.
And what's that? What was it like when you was a pirate? Was it fun?
Yeah, it was... I try not to say the same things in different interviews repeatedly, but there's really only one way of describing it, and I've used this expression before. It wasn't survival of the fittest, it was survival of the least unfit. And we were all shit, but I was arguably slightly less shit than some. But, the fact we were all shit, but we're so passionate about the music, shit as presenters, it doesn't mean, but if you're passionate about music and that passion comes through, it makes it very compelling listening, especially when you're playing stuff that you can't hear on radio elsewhere.
But also, it doesn't as a listener, it's like, I don't think that the presenters were shit, because actually what you're looking for as a listener is music that you can't hear anywhere else, which is what you get. And you're not looking for the kind of Simon Bates smooth kind of thing.
We were a new generation.
You're looking for something different, and you would hear
I think I'm slightly more referring to when Kiss became legal, because Kiss was very loyal to its original presenters, and over time some of them moved on and some didn't. Some, dare I say it, went to Radio 1 like I did. Others sort of fell off the conveyor belt a little bit. But you want passion. I've got a real love-hate relationship with pirate radio. I love pirate radio for what it is, what it stands for. But then some pirate DJs just talk through the music at all the wrong times, and I can find it almost quite disrespectful to the music, even though you're sort of there because of the music.
They can rewind, though. There was a lot of rewinding, that's what I remember. So then you're learning, I suppose, on the job, I believe this about all jobs, you learn on the job. And obviously, as a DJ, you learn on the job. There is no other way of doing it. You can know all the music you want and you can play it to yourself in your room. That's not the same. You're learning how to be in a room with a crowd and what to do with it. Whether that's like on the radio or, preferably in an actual room. What did you get wrong at first and what did you get better at?
I think the most important thing to do is to learn from others around you without copying those around you. And I think the thing that I've learned from others around me, the DJs I most respect, some of whom are very well known and others of whom I was just a particular fan of, is just aura, stage presence, having a good time. And you can't really fake that. There have been a legion of dance music DJs who sort of look down, look quite moody, and they're what I call heads down DJs, and some of whom have got huge fan bases, so they're clearly getting something right. But that's just not me. For me, I'm just joyful to be there, and you play the right records that are joyful. It is a joyful experience. I think the records I like most are a kind of carefully crafted combination of the melancholic and the euphoric sort of rolled into one. And I think a lot of the best dance records are like that. And I think that's almost what you've got to be as a DJ as well.
Yeah, that's true. So which records would you think about in the 90s that did that for you?
I mean, some really obvious ones, like Faithless Insomnia is a classic example of the melancholic meets the absolute euphoric. Ironically, which was recorded in this building we're in at the moment, believe it, or in this road that we're recording this in.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Yeah, that's a classic. Everybody loves it. I mean, you know, I was actually looking at some of your stuff online before we did this interview, and there's a little bit that you put on TikTok, and it was about a particular year, I think 96, and you put Firestar on there, but you also put that Tori Amos' Professional Widow, and it was the Armand Van Helden mix, and that is such a banger. Like, it's an unbelievable track. Like, when I was listening to it, I was like, that is so good, and it's so of its time. But you know, those kind of tracks, they always work, didn't they? Yeah,
there are. I don't even know how one would describe that from a genre perspective. I think it's so weird. I think it's good. I mean, all DJs are different. I've tried not to get too bogged down in particular genres. I think you've tried to have a philosophy which is that the most credible artist on earth can make a shit record, and the most uncredible can do the reverse. Just try to listen to things off. Because Tori Amos, Armand Van Helden's too cool for school, of course, but Tori Amos, you wouldn't imagine.
She's a
just
different
not something
genre.
you'd imagine you'd be playing.
There is a quote from you which you said, you are 51% a clubber and 49% a DJ.
It's about the energy, isn't it? It's like, you know, music sounds great in one's bedroom if you've got a good enough sound system and a great enough record, but stick it on with a huge sound system and a crowd bouncing up and down, and it takes on a whole new life. And it's quite a difficult challenge both then and now for years and years and years, for decades. One of the reasons I'm still busy now, I think, is because that excitement of listening to records during the week and trying to filter out the very best ones and imagining how they're going to sound when you play them out at your gigs that weekend, that excitement has never waned. But you can never quite tell until you put a particular record on a big sound system whether it's the absolute banger or something that just sounds pretty good at home.
That's really interesting. Are you somebody that thinks of... Because there was a certain point in the 90s, and I would say like early 90s, where it was almost considered, it's almost like a political act to get that amount, I mean, that's why I think they had the Criminal Justice Act, actually, to get that amount of people, young people, in a room, all, you know, outside pubs or anything legit, to get everybody in the room having a good time was almost like a political thing. Did you ever feel like it was political?
I've heard that said, but I've never quite known where politics, I don't know, humanity ends and politics begins.
Yeah.
To me, I think that, you know, one of the key reasons why club culture, now festival culture and event culture is a better description, has remained so important is because it's the last bastion of hanging out with people you've never met before in a sort of safe environment in a conceptual sense.
Yeah.
So is that a political statement? I don't know. It's definitely a human statement.
Yeah, it's funny, because I think that is, I mean, it's like a small p political thing, isn't it? So basically, if you're being told that people can't get on, it's absolute evidence that people can.
Yeah, because you leave your opinions, your differences, your political, football allegiances, anything is left at the front door. You know, when the sort of ecstasy era died down a bit, of course, you know, those sort of slightly thuggish clubs did re-emerge to an extent, but they weren't really involved in dance culture.
Yes, that's true. Can you feel the changes in like drug culture as you're going through?
I think it's more where you are. Go to Ibiza, and I'm not saying Ibiza because, of course, people have got that holiday mentality. So whether they're all drugged up or not, I don't know. I don't go around the clipboard, you know, ticking people's names off. But I think, the environment you're in makes such a difference. Big dance festivals, really euphoric. Certain big venues are particularly euphoric. And of course, Ibiza is the home of euphoria.
Yes, I should have talked to you about Ibiza. So let's talk about Ibiza. You first went in the late 80s and you went throughout, obviously, even now you still go, but you went throughout the 90s. You ended up setting up your own event, I suppose, really at the end of the 90s. But you were going all the way through. It was hard to explain to people, I think, what Ibiza was like in the 90s because it was really odd. I mean, I'm aware it's a dance aisle. It's always been a kind of party place. But to explain to people that people went over there at that time where people just thought of Spain as a kind of, I don't know, cocktails and sitting by the pool environment, that you would go there and it would be a mad club environment was really unusual. It's odd.
Because there's not, even to this day, there's not really any other, I suppose some might describe Vegas as being like that, but Vegas is,
Ayia Napa or something? Or?
Yeah, Ayia Napa's had a scene, but Ayia Napa's scene existed around one square. I suppose Mykonos, perhaps. But no, Ibiza really owes its infamy to its clubs, even though it would be disingenuous to suggest that that's the only USP of Ibiza, of course. I think the difference then was, you're right, I've been going there. I've been to Ibiza, probably done 500 or 600 gigs in Ibiza. It's kind of that crazy an amount. But there was a big difference then. The clubs didn't have to close religiously. If you ordered a spirit and mixer, you'd watch counting to 10 whilst they continued pouring your measure of vodka. And now it's, I don't know. It sounds quite superficial, and especially in the sort of sober environment that we live in right now, to say that the introduction of spirits measures in Ibiza was the death of the islands. But there's an element of truth in it because it's a metaphor for kind of a slightly more corporate way of doing things.
Yeah. It was it was when you went. If you were to think of an Ibiza memory that you really enjoyed, what would that be?
I remember going to the MTV did this party in a quarry that we were a little bit half cut, and I barely remember getting there, but it went on. I remember Brandon Block and Alex P were DJing there, and it was in this quarry. It just went on forever, and it was one of my best memories, particularly distinctly remember because 5 years later I bought a house overlooking that quarry and they tried to put another party on. I was the first one to ring the police telling them to be quiet.
Can you keep it down?
The ultimate Ibiza NIMBY. If I speak fluent Spanish, but I'm afraid I don't know the word for El NIMBY.
So you bought a house on Ibiza. That's a lovely thing to do. But it did, people still go to Ibiza. It's still a really big deal. But it was the 90s that kind of established that? Absolutely, yeah. It was an evolution towards it becoming... it was almost... I started seeing probably in the towards the end of the 90s and into the early noughties, you started seeing city people being on the flights, with their polo shirts with the collars turned up. Oh, it's just more than a metaphor. It's kind of a reality, a fashion reality. And it was, very, very created a great deal of ambivalence. On the one hand, it was, if you love somewhere, you want it to be known to a broader market, but it was definitely indicative of the way the place was going. Yes. Are you saying it was the death of Ibiza? Not the death. I wouldn't write any form of obituary. Ibiza's hugely successful and very unique. And the fact there isn't an alternative to Ibiza in terms of its offering means that you couldn't possibly be negative about it. Because if you are, I don't like the expression clubber anymore because there are much less clubs, but there's not a better way of saying I am a clubber, ergo I go to Ibiza. Yes, you just have to. There was a moment in the 90s, because of dance culture becoming so big and because of being able to almost see that happen throughout the 90s. So by the end of the 90s, you got superstar DJs. At the beginning, you did not have them. And there's a point where you were voted the best DJ in the world in 1995 by DJ Magazine. Did that mean anything to you? Not really. It happened again in Mixmag, actually, a few years later as well. Did they not give you a crown? They gave me some sort of little trophy. I've got some. I think a very valuable philosophy, whatever you do in the arts, and I'm
for many years, I would have struggled to describe DJing as part of the arts because nobody would have taken you seriously, but now they do, you're only as good as your next gig, really. And I think you've got to always adopt that philosophy, because if you think, oh, I was great last week, or, people have voted me this, voted me that, and that allows me to be complacent and not focus wholly on your next gig, then you're going nowhere fast.
Yeah. And do you find that, because obviously you're always listening to music, but like say in the 90s, you're booked a lot, you're working really, really, really hard. Do you find yourself playing the same set at places, or would it always change?
I think, there were certain weeks where I might do 5 or 6 gigs, and I would try not to bore myself. But meanwhile, you have to keep the same core records that were current in that given week, because it's about crowd reaction. Fundamentally, it's about crowd reaction, and whether or not I'm boring myself is not really what's important. But at the same time, to be good and be enthusiastic, you can't play an identical set. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and it'll do your head in after a while, wouldn't it? I think.
Yeah, obviously it depended as well, and it still does depend, because there are quite a few weeks where I do multiple gigs, on what's about that week. There is the record, the through flow of good new music is now, and has always been, particularly in the 90s, not quite spiky. There are some weeks where there's an incredibly large amount of records, and some weeks where there was a paucity. And when you look back on the 90s, or any decade with great music, you don't realise that, but that's the truth at the time.
One of the things that did happen really, and you mentioned it, you alluded to it earlier, is festival culture. Festival culture really changed. Like I can remember, going to say something like Glastonbury, like in the late 80s, and it had changed by the end of it, but also that dance festivals started. Like I remember tribal gatherings starting and things like that. Like, and now obviously they're absolutely huge, but it seemed to be such a big deal that you could have a festival that had more than one act, that had like 20 different acts, 20 different DJs, and maybe, some PAs or people playing live. It seemed like such a big deal that could happen in the dance genre. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think the first festival I remember doing was it must have been about 92. It's called Universe, and it was in South Wales. It was just over the Severn Bridge. And I remember Sasha did it as well. I can't remember anybody else was on it, but it was the first time I'd done some big events, of course, but it was the first time I recall doing a multi-arena sort of tented festival. And then it wasn't for probably another 5 years or thereabouts before there started to be a multitude. Creamfields started, God's Kitchen's Global Gatherings, a thing called Homelands. So it wasn't like there were dance festivals every week. In the summer for me now, I do a festival a couple of weeks throughout the summer. Back then it was more of a rarity, but they were a new thing, and they were, what was fun about them wasn't just the fact you were playing to this huge audience inside a tent. Playing inside tents is just par excellence. But it was the fact you got to hang out with so many other DJs, really, as opposed to doing the odd gig where you might have 1 or 2 other DJs on the bill. And that aspect of it's really good fun, because you realise you are all, your similarities outweigh your differences enormously. Yeah.
And also there's that magazine culture then, where people were meant to slag people off, weren't they? And then you have to meet them at the festival, so there's no way you could.
Yeah, I think magazines tried to sort of dig out sort of bitterness that didn't necessarily exist for the most part.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, so look, you go to Radio 1 in 97.
Correct, yeah.
And you're doing like between 5 and 7 on Saturday nights, and you're playing, house music, maybe into trance. It's almost like that time where you'll kind of go, 5 o'clock is like, okay, we'll start it off, and then by 7 you're kind of handing it over, and that's when when the night starts. Did you enjoy Radio 1? Did it feel really different to Kiss?
I think I wasn't one of the first ex-Kiss DJs to go there. Trevor Nelson had gone there, Danny Rampling had gone there. So I think had I been the very first, Pete Tong is still there and has done it for years and years and years. I think if I was the first one to go in there after Pete Tong, it would have been more intimidating and felt more alien. But because other people had kind of done it already, it's funny, growing up, it wasn't an aspiration to be on Radio 1, because Radio 1 didn't really cater for dance music at all. So there wasn't a possible line of aspiration.
It absolutely didn't play dance music, anything. It played indie music, but it really didn't play dance at all.
That's right. And they, to be fair, they spotted... It would be pretty difficult for the bosses at Radio 1 to have failed to spot how big dance music had become. So when I went, I remember I've never sort of been particularly nervous about either DJing sort of in front of a crowd or on the radio, largely because I've done it from such a low level at the beginning and done it in such small incremental steps. But I remember being quite nervous about the first month. Actually, you know how your mouth goes dry. And I was like, because I'd never really been nervous as a DJ, I didn't quite know what it was. Couldn't work out why I was drinking so much water and sort of, plan my links and did it's like any form of sort of public speaking, the more within reason, the more preparation you do, the less likely you are to make an idiot of yourself.
Yeah, and it's funny also, there is something about like Radio 1 I remember like the first time I went on Radio 4, which I think was like in the 90s, and I could hear my voice change. And I thought putting on a kind of Radio 4 voice.
Yeah, my kiddies say that to me. They say to me, you sound different on radio, you stop doing it. But, it's ingrained, you can't teach an old dog.
Yeah, you can't help it. Okay, so you started Judgment. This is also in Ibiza. You at the end of the 90s. You started Judgment Sunday.
That was 2000, actually.
Was it? Oh, I thought it was right at the end of the 90s.
I mean, I don't want to sort of step outside the 90s with that. You can give me a good old slap. Give me a good old slap for doing it. No, but I think in a lot of people's kind of memory banks, it feels that way because it went on for a long time.
Yeah.
And a lot of the records we played, especially in the first few years, I think most people would actually consider, incorrectly, but would consider were 90s records. And
you said, like, before we started talking, you said that you felt like that is something that people do quite a lot of. Like, they think of the 90s as a particular era, and actually it almost spreads backwards into the 80s and onwards into the 2000s. Yeah,
I think there's more... Well, from my point of view anyway, I think there's more misconception about the records and some of the cultural things that happened immediately after the 90s, with the millennium and all that sort of stuff, than what happened in that juncture between the 80s and the 90s.
And what do you think the misconception is?
I think it's more, certainly when it comes to music, there's a whole bunch of records that certainly came out in the first 2 or 3 years of the noughties that are just totally considered to be 90s records. But don't ask me to name any because I'm going to get stuck.
Yeah, go on. What can you think?
I'd have to have my iTunes folder in front of me, but there's quite a few of them.
And what do you think the 90s sound or feel, if you could describe it to somebody that didn't know what it was? I mean, obviously things changed throughout the decade, but what would you say?
I think there was significant evolution. I think that obviously the early 90s had a lot of a lot of the sort of the Prodigy and that kind of post acid house sort of branched off into kind of jungle and rave and then into jungle in the early 90s. And then you had a sort of northern big piano sort of anthemic sound which pervaded from the 93, 94, 95, 96. Then from then on in trance started appearing probably 97, 98. That became... There were different schools of thought. I've always loved trance because I've always come from a bit of an indie background, but that became the pervasive sound probably of the late 90s, a lot of the hit dance records. But then you also had things like Shapeshifters and some of those quite fast disco house records as well. So there were, so to define the late 90s as being just the trance era wouldn't really be accurate. I mean, I mixed a lot of those big Ministry albums like The Annual and, dare I say it, the biggest selling dance music compilations that ever have been, a few of the ones that I did. And they had two sides to them. And that's the only reason I can remember it quite coherently, that, one side had the trancey stuff, the other side had all the disco house stuff. Both of, if anything, the disco house stuff is better known now because it's more befits like a greatest hits radio than perhaps some of the trance stuff does.
Yeah. Trance I always think of as a kind of 2 a.m. vibe. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're out, you might start off with piano house, and then there'd be a point where that's where you're entering into that world.
Yeah, it's not. I think there are some people mad enough to listen to it first thing in the morning, but I'm not one of them.
No, it's not me. I feel like we should talk about the law. You spent the early 90s being able to exploit the law by putting on parties because you knew your law. And then, obviously, you ignored it for a while. You were a complete DJ. And now you've gone back to the law because you're an entertainment lawyer. Why did you?
I'm a music. I can handle all spheres of entertainment. I'm a music lawyer, and I deal mainly with electronic music artists. So, so actually, the connection between being a DJ and being a lawyer, because I'm very busy with last year I did 110 gigs, so the DJ side is very buoyant as well. And it sounds totally chalk and cheese to talk about being a DJ and being a lawyer, but actually the area of law that I'm involved in is, if you want to go and if you come to me and say, I want you to do the conveyancing on my property transaction, I'm not your guy. If you get banged up in the middle of the night in Old Kent Road, Nick, I am certainly not your guy. But if you want to sign with Sony Music, I might be able to give you a help.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting, and that's obviously incredibly important for musicians and DJs, and because not to find a point on it, people get ripped off. They get really badly ripped off.
They do, and I think if you've lived and breathed the music business, both in the 90s and beyond, from my perspective, you'll fight the good fight on behalf of artists, probably harder than lawyers for whom it's just a job.
Yeah.
To me, it's the older you get, especially having been around a bit, the more unsavoury experiences you've encountered in amongst the vast majority of much more pleasant experiences, and you kind of use that hopefully to kind of give you a passion to really support people not to be ripped off.
There's a thing about that often comes up in talking about the 90s, and that one of the things is to do with it. There was money in the music business. There was money in the music business. A lot of it came from CDs. So CDs were priced quite highly. A lot of that money went back into the record companies. And obviously when the internet came along, that a lot of that money kind of disappeared. We've got streaming now, so there's much less money about to go to the artists. Is that part of what you're trying to do? Trying to get the money to them? Yes,
of course. I mean, when you look at record contracts, you follow the money. You take your knowledge of what the best possible deal parameters are, and you try and give those to your artists. I mean, going back to all of the 90s was a period of good record sales. The whole Napster thing, the whole illegal download thing was probably, I'm slightly sticking my finger in the wind, but probably about 2002 to 2006. That was a time of real trouble for the music industry. The Spotify and legal digital services really hadn't taken off, not even iTunes, whereas everybody was just going, and it was the minute that the internet got fast enough for people to be able to kind of download music and do it for free. But thankfully the 90s was a time, I mean, the deals weren't always great. I set up 2 labels for Universal, and I, in all honesty, got no idea what deals we were doing with people at all. I just signed records I liked, and then I, relied on in-house lawyers. I had very little interest, dare I say it, back then in the business side of of the records I was signing. I was just a passionate DJ who was lucky enough to set up some record labels and was able to sign things I loved. But retrospectively, I've looked back on some of those deals because I've sort of kept in touch with those people, and some of the deals are really terrible for the artists I was signing. But I wasn't doing it deliberately. I was just,
you just didn't know.
I knew nothing. I didn't want to learn. Dare I say it?
And also it's funny. It's just something that you don't consider, I think, when you're younger. But like you say, the law kind of comes into things a bit more as you're older. So now you're advising people and you're helping them not to end up in kind of rubbish deals. Yeah,
I mean, I do represent some record labels and some managers. I mean, obviously...
But does that mean you're then trying to get them into rubbish deals?
Well, no. Generally speaking, I will... If I'm looking after managers, or it's more managers really than record labels that I would look after on the other side of the fence, I will make my opinions very clear to the people I represent. I won't say it would have to be out and out terrible, the deal that I was being asked to kind of paper for me to say no, but I would make it perfect. I would make it perfectly clear to the people for whom I'm doing it what I thought of what they were doing. And normally when you do that, they sort of back off.
Yeah. You tell them. That's good. I like to hear it. Okay, and you're still, obviously, you're DJing, you're doing 110 gigs last year. That is a lot. That's one every 3 days, isn't it? I mean, it's centred around the weekend more. Yeah, of course, but it's a lot. You're still so every weekend you're DJing, and you're working as a lawyer Monday to Thursday. Yeah,
into Friday as well. Yeah. But it's
Why are you not knackered?
Because I love what I do. I think I'm very. I mean, I spend a lot of hours working, but I'm very privileged to do what I do.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like work. I mean, the lawyer thing you might think feels like work, and because it can be. The DJing is quite consistent. It's quite pattern driven. You listen to records through the week, prepare the 2 radio shows, the podcast that I do, the radio show that I do.
Yeah.
make them towards the end of the week. They go out, think about your gigs, think about what you're going to play, go out, prepare your memory stick for DJing, go out, do your shows, either get driven somewhere, get on a plane. And that the weeks are basically the same. Whereas as a lawyer, one is always busy, but there can be some weeks where it's so insanely busy that the hours are just crazy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that is really interesting. And do you find that when you're DJing now, because one of the things that seems to have happened is that people are going to clubs earlier, like, there's afternoon raves or there's ones that finish at midnight. Do you find that you're DJing more earlier now? Yeah, I mean,
it's interesting. Things that have got, most of what I do is kind of 35, 40 plus, but I do a fair amount that's for the younger market. And both markets go out much earlier now. If you look at some of Britain's biggest clubs, I guess up in Tottenham, the former IKEA and Warehouse Project in Manchester, a lot of those places are so much earlier than they used to be for the younger market. And then the older market don't go out late either. So I think I've been very lucky in that I reached a point of an age where I had not even the remotest idea I would still be DJing at this age. But the DJ bit's lovely bit. If I was still doing like 6 or 7 in the morning every Friday and Saturday, it would be life shortening. There's no two ways about it, and just not doable. Yeah. That's it's just too much after a while, isn't it? You can't recover in order to become a lawyer. Well, precisely.
You wouldn't be able to do it.
I definitely found myself drinking less when I DJ because I can't cope. It's one thing doing both, but I just cannot be hungover when I've got to think about exercise one's brain. But I think in life, mental exercise is as valuable as physical exercise. And, our parents' generation, probably many of them had jobs for life. And I don't think many people of our generation do have jobs for life. Most of my closest friends have probably been through a couple of different iterations of their working lives. So to change and do something different, in my case, in your 40s, the best thing I ever did, because it's just kept me alive as a person. And if anybody is thinking about taking that leap into doing something wholly different, as long as you're not being totally unrealistic about what it is that you propose to be doing, it could turn out to be the greatest decision you ever made.
Okay, so here at Talk 90s To Me, we love music almost as much as, Judge Jules. So we have a Talk 90s To Me Spotify playlist to keep that love going. Which track would you like to add, Jules?
I'm going to add one that, there are so many 90s records that one could add that everybody knows. And I'm going to add one that at the time I just loved so much, but I don't think is a tune that, with the kind of passage of time, is a particularly well-known one. But I just hope people love it all the same. And it's by Christine W, spelt with a K. And it's called Feel What You Want. And it was produced by my good friend Rollo, who is the guy behind Faithless.
Yeah.
It's got those really melancholic yet euphoric chords that just do it for me every time. Really strong vocal, really great lyrics, really sounds like the singer means it. All those elements that just make for an outstanding generation-defining track, certainly from my playlist perspective anyway. Would you say that music has those kind of tracks can bring you to tears, Jules? I do find myself, on the one hand, I do a Peter Pan type job. I do find myself being a bit more teary as I've got older. I don't know if you find the same thing.
I was always an absolute crybaby anyway.
But definitely it's that interplay between music and memories that can really do it for you. Do it for me emotionally.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? Because it's like, you know what it is? It's because music is simultaneously of its era and completely timeless, and that's something to do with you as well. So it's like not only are you somehow plugging into to being younger, it's also you now as well. So it's the whole of your life in one track. Yeah, and whilst there are only a certain amount of tracks that have a specific memory surrounding, or those very few tracks you can remember when you played them for the first time, and they tend to be some of the most iconic tracks ever.
you really can. One's life is set to music. The moments in one's life, historical kind of milestones and signposts in one's life are all set to music. And I don't think that just applies to DJs. Of course, it doesn't.
No, definitely not. I mean, that's why music is the best, as far as I'm concerned, the best art form, because there's room for you in it. Like if it's a film, you can't necessarily imagine yourself in a Tarantino film, but
I have actually. That's that Travolta and the dancing scene. That's me.
That was Talk 90s to Me, featuring the amazing Judge Jules, who can be found in many places on all social media platforms for a start. His website is judgejules.net, where you can find links to his regular Friday night radio show Global Warm-Up and lists of where he's playing. Is there anything else you would like to point our listeners to, Jules?
I think that'll do. Have a look if you want. And if you want to ignore my website, I won't be offended.
I will. I think you should go there. Okay, if you join our Patreon, not only will you get the chance to buy some very cute merch, such as Talk 90s to Me mugs, T-shirts, bucket hats, you will also get some special extra episodes, and you might become our Talk 90s king or queen for a week. And even if you don't join our Patreon, why not subscribe to Talk 90s to Me on your podcast app and follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky? Why not? You can DM us on there if you want. We're Talk 90s to Me pod. And please send us an email so you can tell us about your own 90s and what you would like us to feature on the show. That email is talk90stome@podmasters, podmasters.co.uk. See you next week.